LinkedIn, does it? If people have signed
Yeah,
up?
it is now live on LinkedIn, and we are now live even on Twitter. I connected my Twitter account, but we're currently live, so we already entered the stage, and it's my pleasure welcoming you again, Tobias. And it's awesome. Today's topic, I mentioned in the title, skillfully navigating any conversation. And this is, again, a little bit of a tricky teaser because, as we talked about, the type of conversation we had in mind, or I talked about with you, was rather difficult ones, or some people might call it difficult. And it's conflict. And conflict is an interesting word because, first of all, I think we hear a lot about it, and we hear a lot about conflict resolution, right? So whenever there's conflict, we feel this is something we need to solve by whatever means. So for the beginning, I would love to, first of all, start, let's say, what's your view on conflict? Or let's say, what's in your opinion, the nature of conflict? Maybe let's start this way.
Okay. I think that we're always in conflict. We're always in conflict with other people, pretty much continuously. If we're not in conflict, it means we agree with absolutely everything that they say. And that would be so boring. Life would be so boring if it were like that. So there's always some level of conflict going on between people. And we successfully navigate it because we've learned how to do that. Some of it is innate and some of it is learnt, but we negotiate, we have conversations, we listen to other people, and we kind of move through it. And so essentially, I'm in conflict on a daily basis with my children and with my spouse, and probably loads of other people as well. But it's not negative, right? Is it? Because it's just part of who we are and what we do, and we figure out ways through that. And it's part of the enjoyment of being human and being alive. So when we talk about conflict, I suppose we're talking about it when it gets out of hand, all right, or when it gets toxic. When it gets to a place where we can't just kind of like navigate through it. We've lost the skills. We don't have yet the skills to manage that particular area or that particular difficulty or that particular person. So quite often what it is. So that's when we need some help on it. So, I mean, that's, starting off, that's how I would see conflict. It's a natural thing and a welcome thing, in fact, until it isn't.
And that's a good point, because I think we, especially in nowadays world, where everything changes so fast, we're connected with so many people, right? And teams we always talk about diversity, by the way, that naturally, I think, calls for conflict somehow. And as you mentioned, I mean, it's quite interesting because when you said I can be in conflict with my spouse, with my children, with my family members, like with my teammates, I can even be in conflict with myself, right? Like, what should I do? Shall I go with this idea or that idea? Shall I go to the office or not to the office? Not joking, but
I mean, that whole plus or minus thing that people get into. I've got a decision to make. Should I do this or should I do that? And I'll put all the pros on one side and the cons on the other side. That's managing conflict, with internal conflict, like you say.
Yeah. Where do you see the difference? I mean, there is this famous model. I'm not sure how well known it is in the English speaking world, by Friedrich Glasel, who is obviously he's obviously a German speaking guy. So it's often referred to as conflict stage resolution model, where he has a couple of stages and basically 3 levels. So level number 1 is about win-win, where you're still able to come to a solution. And then it comes more towards fighting against each other, like, growing parties, finding people who are of your opinion. And at the end, it might be really toxic when it's about fight against each other, which might be about destruction. What I'm missing in this model is actually the natural piece, what we just talked about. But this sort of conflict being really a tension to be solved, that's like his first stage. I don't feel this is it, because, as you said, we're permanently in conflict when there is ideas. But what do you see? I mean, where's the limit on a team? Let's get back to a creative team, and every agile team somehow is invited to be creative because we're working on things that are unknown, that are maybe haven't been seen before. Where is the limit where we need help, or where we actually, well, just called for, I don't know, a different type of
I don't know that we need help. I'm not sure about stepping in to resolve someone else's conflict. You can bring these conflict people in and they'll kind of resolve your conflict for you, or manage you in some way. I'm not sure that's healthy. I think that, but we can learn better ways of communicating and more respectful ways of communicating ahead of time. This is where upfront planning pays off, I think. A bit of upfront planning here. Learn some skills to actually have decent conversations with people. Learn some skills about lowering your own level of emotional arousal before you enter into these conversations. Very simple things we can do, but many people just don't know about them and haven't thought about them and don't think it's worth paying attention to. So I think that if we do a little bit of work ahead of time on ourselves around this, then we'll have much better conversations. See, what we've got to remember is when conflict gets out of hand, it usually, and perhaps almost always, is that the other person isn't us, right? I mean, it's as simple as that. We want the other person to be more like us, and that's when we run into conflict. And the other person, of course, wants us to be more like them, and we're not like them, and they're not like us, and so we run into conflict. And perhaps the more differences there are between us, then the more likely the conflict is to arise. But if we don't sort of begin by at least acknowledging that, we're going to get a bit lost in that. There's a great tendency to want to, even though we might not say it aloud, but we want to change other people. We want that person or those people to be more like we are, to think the way we think, and to have, agree with our ideas, because then there's no conflict. But we don't really want that, because that's boring. There's no innovation, no creativity in that.
Is it really like we want other people be like us, or is that a difference to we just try to defend our idea? I like this, what you came up with, and we're not approaching a conflict here. It's like, it's an interesting thought.
There's a lot of defensive ideas. So the true spirit of collaboration is this idea of letting go of your own ideas, even the good ones, especially the good ones. Let go of the good ideas, because then we get the chance to build something new. When we're holding on to an idea, there's no innovation in that. There's no creativity in that. We'll just do what the strongest person thinks in the room, so, but to the detriment of other people. So collaboration is about letting go of our own ideas. But I do think that there's some truth in when someone doesn't agree with our idea. If they were more like us, they would agree with our idea, wouldn't they? Naturally. So I want to make you more like me. You've got to see it from my point of view. We're getting to that sort of dialogue kicks off there.
And that rings another bell, because I read your post, I think it was in Medium, about diversity. I think some of these posts are already were published some years ago, so probably somewhere around 18 or 17.
Don't they, those things on the internet? They never go
away.
It's
true. You can't hide them, and if you delete them in one spot, they will show up in another one. But still, it's interesting ideas. And the idea I think you raised here was rather not only talking about diversity, but even talking about neurodiversity. And this brought me into very interesting perspectives, because obviously there are more and more insights available how people can be different, and sometimes even given circumstances, right? Physical circumstances, like the brain works in different ways. And as you mentioned in your article, the software industry, there has even a sort of a affinity to some kinds of these developments. And now, given a global,
people on ASD people on the autistic.
Exactly.
Are attracted to the kind of work that we do in the software.
Exactly. And so this, of course, I mean, even in my view, invites for conflict, or saying it this way, what we just had, other people not feeling the way we would expect them, or not like us, or so. Isn't that even I mean, what's the challenge here? What can I do if I'm in a team member? I mean, you mentioned listening before, but that might be not enough.
Well, there's a couple of things here with that. The idea of neurodiversity, we've raised consciousness about that in our organisations over the last decade or so, but not much earlier than that, really, to be honest.
Exactly. Yeah.
But certainly in the last decade or so, we've raised consciousness about neurodiversity, and people are not afraid to speak it aloud. I remember the very first time someone at an agile conference came out, as it were. I don't like that phrase, but told me that they were Asperger's was the term used at that time. It's dropped now. But and I was amazed about how forthright he was about it, and I really appreciated that, because it allowed the session to take a different form than the way that Lisa Atkins and I had planned it. And but it was quite rare for that to happen. It's much less rare now. People on the autistic spectrum are out there giving talks about being autistic and about what that means, and helping people understand that. So if you've got someone in your team who's identified that way, we're much more respectful than we would otherwise have been, because we've able to, it's perhaps not the greatest thing, but we've kind of been able to label them and say, oh, that person's this, so I need to interact with them in a particular way, and they're not going to be like me, right? We acknowledge that. But everyone else in the team, there's a chance they might be like me. So I might be aiming my persuasion towards them rather than to this one person who's identified as already not like me.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, because talking team, right, brings us a little bit further. There is this team identity thing, right, which sometimes comes up, where we say we build strong bonds between team members. Isn't that a little bit in contradiction with having this openness for diversity, and even being not as close, like not being equal, everybody being similar, call it this way, equal, yes, but not similar. So like, isn't team a little bit of a contradiction to really going for more diversity, to go for healthy conflict?
Well, why is it a contradiction? I'm not sure.
I was just wondering about this again, about these ideas about building, this team identity, who we are. It's all this. To me, it sometimes feels like, and maybe this attaches a little bit to this psychological safety thing, which is another one on the market, where we try to live in harmony, right? We confuse a good team with always, liking each other, being in good mood, and just a sort of dream team.
What drives a lot of this, Mike, is what I call toxic happiness.
Toxic happiness. What a nice word.
Yeah, it's this emphasis in corporations to force people to be happy. Companies have chief happiness officers now. I don't know what they do. I guess they go around kind of like painting smiles on people's faces. You're not allowed to be sad, it seems, at work anymore. You have to be happy. You have to be part of a team and a team player. And of course, that ruins diversity. It ruins individuality. It takes away personal feeling. It undermines so much about who we are as people. So I call it is toxic. It's toxic happiness. We can well do without that. All of those consultants who make money by making people happy, I stay well away from them. I tripped up over that in a conference one time, and it was the most painful experience. So and I think that's part of what the problem is in terms of what you're talking about. All teams have to be together and have to be a team, have to be happy. Team doesn't mean that, though. Team means a bunch of individuals who are able to work together and to support each other. If you take a football team, we have no idea how well those guys like each other, or those women now, on or off the pitch. But when they're on the pitch, they play amazingly together. They may hate each other off the pitch, we don't know, but they leave it aside, don't they, when they play? And they're all playing differently. They're not playing the same. They're all playing in their own particular way, from their own backgrounds, and bringing what they've got into the game. And we do the same thing when we're building software. We bring what we have, and we bring our experiences and our background and our education and our life, to a great extent, into this. And we listen to the lives of other people, and we collaborate with them. We don't have to like them. And you don't even have to know people that well. you have to know them well enough to feel comfortable perhaps raising concerns or confronting them. But we don't have to like each other. I think that's quite important.
So if you would think about a team is about to start, like, we're given a new opportunity to work on a product or on a challenge, or maybe new people getting together, how would you make this topic of diversity, potential conflict, something to look at in the beginning? How would you, I mean, we know working agreements, all this stuff, but I think that's way too shallow and not really impactful.
Well, it's hard doing working agreements ahead of time, isn't it? I mean, we have to work together first of all to get a feel of each other. But I think there's a place for what you might call a protocol. I think a protocol is like it's a structure, isn't it? It's a framework. It allows us to call each other out when we're off track or something. But it needs to come from within. It needs to come from within the team, and it needs to build over time. You might have one or two kind of key points that you want to talk about. A protocol would be, if you're working as part of a software development team, you want to have coding standards. You don't want people to be just writing code in any old way. And there might be existing standards that you need to follow. So it's just an agreement. We're going to follow the company standards for coding practices, right? They're documented here. If our code goes off track, we're going to call each other out on it. That's a protocol. So we can certainly come up with agreements like that. But the rest of it has to emerge, just like everything else does when we're doing agility. It has to emerge, and we have to learn about it, and we have to reflect on it, and we have to make choices based on the reflection about what to do next. And so a good team will be able to embrace that idea of working. And again, it doesn't mean that they're all going to be friends or they're all going to even like each other, but they're going to come to a way of working that meets the needs of the people we're doing the work for, whether that's our employer or our customer. Or the user. That's who we should be focused on, isn't it?
Yeah. Would you see a coach role or a Scrum Master role, whatever that is, being important at this stage in the beginning to look at these things a little bit more consciously in the beginning phase or so?
I think that we could all benefit from learning a little bit more about how to manage difficult situations when we run into them, from our own perspective, not from the other person's perspective. And that's a lot of what the workshop is that I run. It's about self-reflection. The Scrum Master might advise people or recommend to people that they do that. I'm going to have to move upstairs.
Oh, no problem.
That's all right. I'm walking while I walk.
Yeah, cool. I can well hear you, so no worries.
Refresh the question for me, Mike.
Well, we talked about the question about working agreements, talking about conflict in the beginning might rather emerge. We need to reflect, and then there is the question: to which extent does the Scrum Master or coach, whatever we have around us, play a vital role to make this even work?
So what is the Scrum Master's role in all this? Not much more, certainly not as a conflict resolver. Definitely get that out of the way. Someone who might notice that some people have more skills than others and get them to share those skills, and maybe give a talk about it, or some kind of, I don't know, demonstration or something like that. Or if he sees that people don't really have that skill, then to look at places they might go and get it. So you can sort of preempt it to some extent, but see, what you don't want to have happen is for some conflict to kick off, and no one knows what to do about it, and they're coming and complaining to the Scrum Master as if he's some sort of counselor or something like that. We're all grown-ups. We need to figure this out for ourselves.
This is the point I love so much. What you already also wrote about psychological safety, right? We talked about it before, and a term which is now the next buzzword, like many others, like many of the words which made sense in the 90s, I always say it this way, and got hyped in the past few years, and and are now blindly thrown around, right? And psychological safety feels like, yeah, we all feel comfortable, and at the same time, if our only goal is to feel comfortable, right? How could we actually grow? How could we move further?
Exactly,
Right?
and I think that people have misunderstood that term psychological safety to mean comfortable. You've made me uncomfortable. People say I'm not comfortable with that comment. I'm not comfortable with that remark. When did we have to be comfortable? Who's ever said that? Where does that rule come from? If we're comfortable, like you said, we're not. We're like in a sofa, just kicking back.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not much creativity that comes. We want to be uncomfortable in the workplace. That's what we want to be. We want to be on the edge a little bit. All right. We want to be kind of wary and on the edge and kind of looking out for opportunities. But that doesn't mean that we should be fearful. And I think that psychological safety is more about that. It's like let's remove fear from the workplace, right? So people are not coming in worried about being bullied by their boss. That doesn't mean you become comfortable. It means you become free. That's very different, isn't it? And so we misuse quite a lot. We misuse that term psychological safety. I'm pretty sure from what I've read that that's not the intent.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you are running a workshop, and that's why that's an interesting point, because it is called, I'm putting it out here, just if people are interested, I think it's available online.
It is online.
Resolution, right? And that's the interesting point, because I think as we talked about it, it is actually not so much about resolving conflict, right? It's maybe not the main point.
It's not, and it is. So I mean, a lot of that would depend on how we define the word resolution, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Resolution isn't necessarily making things nice. It might be making things move in a positive direction. So what we want to do with conflict in the workplace is recognize its power and harness it, because it is powerful. Conflict is power. Anger is power. When we have those kind of strong feelings, there's a lot of energy behind them, and let's find a way to grab that energy and do something good with it rather than letting it drag us down, because it can go in either direction. So the idea of conflict resolution, and to be honest, it's the title of the workshop isn't always describing exactly what the workshop's about. So I'm not looking at making things nice, and I make that clear in the write-up. I'm looking at more at like, what can we are in conflict. We are often in conflict. So what do we do about that? What do we do with it? How do we utilize it?
So what would we do? I mean, if we are now approaching a situation where it is becoming a little bit dense, a little bit tough across the team, there might be different ideas and they clash against each other, and we're not thriving for resolution, right? Getting basically rid of, or let's say calming down, call it this way, but rather want to get further. What are your thoughts around this?
There's no prescription, is there? There's no way of, well, this is what you should do in that situation.
It's a skill, right? It's more of a skill.
But there's also structure that helps us, and I think that some of the structures that came out of sociocracy back in I don't know, 100 years or more or so ago, I think that was begun, are very helpful for this. This idea of consent, of seeking consent. We talk a lot about consensus in the workplace, and then we dismiss the idea of consensus because no one will ever all agree on something. We'll never get consensus on this, so therefore we have to put a strong leader in to make the decision. But there's a third way, and it's the way of consent. And consent is different to consensus, whereas consensus is we all agree. Consent is we don't disagree. Not the same thing, right? So I don't have to like your idea, but I need to be able to accept it and try it out. Well, I can give consent to you to try this idea out that I don't particularly like, and I don't have to agree with, and I can voice my concern, and I can also say, I'm concerned about this, I'm not sure it's the right thing, but other people seem to think it is, therefore I'm willing to give it a go, right? And that's consent, and that allows us to move forward, and it allows us to embrace the conflict of the different ideas and do something with it rather than getting stuck with it. And of course, in sociocracy, it's very like agile, is that no decision is permanent. You get to revisit it at some juncture whenever you choose. You get to try again. If it's not working, you check it out and try again.
Yeah.
But you know, so there are structures that we can learn about and include in our decision-making processes that are really quite powerful. Now, the process of consent, by the way, is not a fast process. It's quite a slow process, but ultimately it's faster because you're not getting into lots of fights and you're not leaving people disgruntled and upset. You're actually bringing people together, and so you're more likely to be productive in the longer term if you do that. So it's spending a little bit of time to slow down in order to go a bit faster. Just in the same way that we talk about retrospectives. Some people say retrospectives are a waste of time because I'd rather be getting the work done. But we know that's it's better to retrospect and do the work properly than it is to just not talk and do. So the balance between these things.
That's a very good point. What you raised with not too fast, because I believe it would be very simple to say, all right, now we do consent decision making, right? You can do this one, and then all right, you don't have to agree, but you don't need to. In this way, it's also not disagreeing,
Right.
and okay, that's very easy, right? But am I really in the position of saying, okay, when it comes up again, or when we go this way, what will I do?
So this comes back to psychological safety. If you're working in a place that has psychological safety, yes, you can say what you feel. You can say, I've got a concern. You can say, I've got a really big concern. And that gives you an opportunity to speak about it. But if you're working in a toxic environment where if you go against the grain, then there's going to be repercussions. Then you're not. You're just going to go, yep, no problem. Right? We just become yes men, people, yes people. So
if you wouldn't see conflict arising or coming up after a while on a team, would you see this actually as a toxic sort of a?
I would be suspicious. Yes,
Suspicious.
I would be concerned if everyone seemed to just kind of like be in alignment and go along with it. And there was no disagreement. I'd be concerned that there was something systemic that was preventing people really speaking their mind.
So you're offering workshops on diving deeper on these concepts, but let's assume not everybody's attending your workshop, because then you have thousands of people joining in November, which would be probably good. Isn't it?
Not that many.
But the question really is, isn't this way of being in conflict, the capability of being in conflict, an educational problem? And you know where I'm pointing to, this sort of the way we grow up in schools, in kindergarten already, at home, in schools, at university. Aren't we drilled towards agreement, towards following, towards, heads nodding?
Yeah, we are. That's true. And we take that with us, don't we? We take it,
That's the
all the way
point,
through. I mean, a lot of it starts in the home as well, before that even. So it certainly is there prevalent in schools. Universities less so, but there's still a need to comply if you want to do well. So we are. It echoes all the way through the system, doesn't it? And then we bring it into the workplace with us because it's what we know. And it takes quite a lot of work to undo that. So really, if we wanted to really change things, we're changing it at the wrong place. We're changing at the top of the pyramid, if you like. Whereas we really need to change it at the base. And so everything else sort of follows through. Pyramid's not a good analogy, but a river. It's no point clearing out the toxic waste at the estuary of the river. It's going to keep flowing down, isn't it? So you need to go find out where the source is of that and prevent it happening, and you have a clean river. So we're looking for a clean river.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm challenged with these things too, because I've got, like you've got children, I've got 2 small children, and it's sometimes just hard to, let's say it this way, to debate with small children who, I don't know, want to do this or want to do that, or are not of your opinion, while you feel, but I have responsibility. And suddenly you feel yourself like being a manager in an organization, like, oh, I have responsibility here, so you better follow my advice. Oh God, where I lost.
There's 2 things that my wife and I consider that we are responsible for, and that's the health and the welfare of our children. So any decisions made around health or welfare are our decisions without debate. So if my daughter says I want to go to school on my own from now on, I would not consider that safe. And so I would say, no, you're too young to do that, and there's not a debate about it. So we've made that agreement with them. We've told them time and time again as they're growing up, this is our domain. Other things we can talk about and discuss and try and arrive at an agreement. If you want to do something we don't want to do, or we want to do something you don't want to do, you get a voice, but not in those areas. So I think that's quite important, to know the domain is important, right? It's not the same rules everywhere, the same rules in some areas, but different rules in a different area.
Now, healing this maybe, or becoming, let's say, raising the bar a little bit at organizational level. So back to companies, do you think wouldn't it be a good idea to make this not only a topic on single teams, on individual teams, but actually check into these challenging topics from time to time on a more broader level? Like, I don't know, it could be an open space conference, could be any sort of open space. Together with anyone on the organization, especially if you're in a traditional one like management, like HR, just to get together and talk about these challenging things and just say, we need to grow this capability. How are we going to do that? How can we learn from each other on that? Because it's so important. Did you ever see that on companies happening?
I've not seen that happen, but in my mind, I'm imagining that my colleague and friend Dan Mesick does that. He does a lot of work on using open space to help organizations move forward. So I could imagine he might be worth chatting to him.
Yeah,
he may well have done something along those lines. I think you're right, though. I think bringing people together to have those kinds of conversations doesn't happen nearly enough. Most of the structures in organizations is like, let's send our X group to Scrum training, or let's send our group to learn about Lean. But it's not like let's us go. It's that let's send. It's more about sending people rather than trying to figure it out for yourself, learn yourself, and bring that learning back.
Yeah, and it could. I was just thinking loud. It could raise awareness also between levels, right? Unfortunately, we're still thinking in these hierarchies, right?
We are thinking in that way because they exist.
They exist, yeah. And that would be an opportunity to say, hierarchy doesn't mean in all cases, or let's say the other way around. In what cases would it be open to debate, which is, I think, rather a British competence to debate, because that's what we don't learn in our universities, to basically have different opinions, to allow different opinions, and really get into discussions, have conflict between senior leadership, CEOs, C-level people, and team members about what direction to take, what to put on a product, what to do on technology X or Epsilon. Just thinking that, wouldn't that be amazing to create such an environment where we start learning that?
It would, but I don't think debate is the tool to get there. Debate is a competition. Let's not forget that.
Oh, that's true. I'm mixing it a little bit.
Isn't it? Dialogue, of course. We want to have dialogue, meaningful dialogue that moves us forward, dialogue where we actually listen to the other perspective. It seems that the higher up, this is just my experience, right? But it seems like the more senior people are in the organization, the smaller their ears get. I don't know if you've noticed that, but developers have big ears, and executives have really tiny ears. They don't hear very well. So I don't know why that is, but it feels like because you become more important, you're supposed to know more, and you can't show that you don't know, because if you show that you don't know, then you're not really fit for the job. So there's a lot of fear. The Peter principle and all that. You're familiar with that, right? The higher you go in an organization, you rise to your level of incompetence. So these people are on their way up to their level of incompetence, and they can't let on. So they can't really listen, they can't hear, and they can't learn, actually. A lot of the time. It's quite sad, actually.
So looking once again at your workshop, and it's coming in November, it's pretty soon. What can we expect there? If anybody attends, we just talked about conflict and everything. What will we learn, or what will the typical?
Well, we look at some structures and some principles around good communication, and then in the second part of it, it's a 2-afternoon workshop. I set it up. I'm doing workshops just across 2 afternoons, 1-day workshops across 2 afternoons. It opens it up for people in west of here to join. So people in the States are able to access that, because I've had quite a few requests from there. So I'm experimenting with that model. But on in the afternoon, or on the second day in this case, we put that into practice using people's real situations. And so we play that out in some form to actually put these ideas into practice and learn from that. So it's a role play experience, essentially, a particular kind of role play. It's not the regular one. Yeah, it's quite powerful, actually.
Yeah, that's what I imagine. Typical participants, is that totally mixed, or I mean, is it a little bit biased towards, I don't know, Scrum Master, coaches? Or
well, that's my world, isn't it? Mostly, those are mostly the people I know. My LinkedIn group is people doing Scrum and Agile and stuff. So it's mostly attractive, but not exclusively. No, I get people from other walks of life who come there as well. Yeah, so it's it can be quite a mixed group.
Yeah. So I would recommend everyone to go and check it out. Maybe I'll do it myself.
I recommend you to check it out, Mike.
Yeah, it's what I just said. I think it's something you can never learn enough about. And again, I have certain methods, practices, how I would deal with what we had, toxins and antidotes and things like that. But the interesting thing is, and role play suddenly turns into a sort of a real life experience, is when the going gets tough, right? It's this sort of, what you just mentioned, the skill of listening, the skill of, I was just thinking, listening, not only what you say, but what it does to me. Right, this sort of active listening.
I'm actually going to rephrase the term role play, because you're not playing roles. What you're actually doing is rehearsing. You're rehearsing for a real conversation that's about to come up, or you're unpacking an awkward or failed conversation that you've already had. But it's not really role play. It's not quite the right phrase for it.
Yeah,
it's very interactive, and you're actually having real dialogue, real conversations.
Yeah. So this seems to be a key competence, right? Conflict, maybe taking it as an opportunity rather than a challenge alone, as long as it's not going toxic, and then how to approach it, how to basically learn more about others, but also about yourself, and then basically be more open to what can happen and emerge.
Yeah. One of the problems with some of the conversations we go into, conflict conversations that we're trying to resolve, is we have an expectation about how it should turn out. But we have to be able to go in there with an acceptance that it may not and probably won't turn out the way we want it to, and we have to be okay with that. And I think that causes a lot of pain when we have an expectation and our expectation isn't met. Essentially, unmet expectations become resentments. So we need to be very wary of that, about having too high expectations of things.
I was about to come to my expectation. I was coming basically to an end of our conversation, because we're already 40 minutes on live. But it triggered another question. Would that be helpful, actually? I mean, to put our expectations, or literally our agendas, more on the table? Because isn't that the game, right? Like saying conflict arises from, I try to trick somebody. I don't talk a lot about what my intent is here, but as soon as you're not following my way, I'm getting a little bit angry or something. But becoming more clear and open about what is at stake, what is my agenda, and everyone doing that, would that be even feasible as a sort of a protocol? Because we talk protocols.
I think it's feasible, and I think it's very desirable. To make your intent clear. It's down to that, just transparency again, isn't it? Let's be transparent in the work that we do, and transparent in how we feel about the work that we do, and what our plans are. Having plans that you're not, if you're part of a team and you have plans and no one else knows about them, that's not teamwork. So we want to be able to feel bold enough to share these things, and recognize that we might have to let go of that idea and someone else might have a better one. But we'll never discover the better idea. I just experienced really quickly. I just ran a CSM workshop
3-day one, and the participants of that build products over the 3 days using Scrum. And after the first sprint, the customer who came to look at the product really disliked it, didn't like it at all. Gave them very poor feedback. They were very despondent, very disheartened because they'd worked really hard on this. And if we'd left it at that, it would have been a horrible ending to the day. We reconceived it, so they were willing to explore using what they had to make something new that was desirable to the customer. And after the second sprint, they had created this amazing product that delighted the customer, which probably wouldn't have happened if they hadn't made that mistake in the first place. So it was the failure that generated the success. And so it was very interesting, and it was the dialogue itself, which was really between the person who was an actual customer, I'd say, and the team making this thing. It was a really heartfelt and brave, courageous conversation, and it illustrated all of the Scrum values and the power of review and retrospective to create great products. It was a living example of that.
Right.
And that's what we want to bring teams in to be able to do, is to have those kind of dialogues. I wish I'd recorded it. Could have put that out on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, you needed to, somehow scramble the faces and maybe the voices and everything. But there's another thought. That obviously sounds like we need to be careful to maintain a conversation up to a certain point, right? And not just leave it where it is and say, all right, we ran into each other with our opinions, and then, oh, sorry, I have to leave, because that leaves a bad taste, right? It probably happens a lot of times.
You need to bring it to some sort of resolution, not conclusion necessarily, but you need to be able to bring it to a place where you're comfortable leaving the room without this kind of seething arousal that you might be feeling, because that's obviously going to get you to stew over it, lose sleep at night, come back in the morning even more grumpy. So we have to be aware of those kind of things.
Exactly. All right.
Mike.
A short conversation about a very important topic we could probably talk about a whole week through, because it's actually about life, right? Being in conflict with ourselves, with others, and learning from each other. And from there, I again recommend joining your event, because it is obviously a great experience to look into this and just.
Some people like it. Yes, you can read the reviews on the page.
Oh yeah, I'll do, and I think I did already, by the way, because I scanned through, of course, but I recommend everyone. And for now, I say thank you, Tobias, for your time, for the conversation.
Thanks for inviting me on again. It's good to chat with you.
Was great having you. And for everyone watching the video, stay tuned.
Take care.